Welcome to episode 74 of the Triage Method podcast. This week we have another guest episode. So we're here with Mr. Lyndon Purcell, all the way. Is it Purcell or Purcell?
Yeah, probably the second one, Purcell, but there's even debate within our family, so you can go with whatever.
Yeah, I think the Irish pronunciation would probably be Purcell. Yeah, Lyndon
Well,
Purcell.
the
Purcell.
heritage is Irish, so
Really?
I probably, yes, it is.
It's
Okay.
definitely
I can't
Purcell.
say
So,
anything more than that. Yeah.
but
Oh,
anyway.
you're the man in the know. Go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, so Lyndon is our guest for this week. Be looking forward to having him on the podcast for a while because I think he has a lot of value to offer. He's been on a few podcasts before, but some of you may not have come across his work. So hopefully you're going to find that there's some valuable insights within this conversation. I think there'll be a lot of things that come up where that they're really things that we talk about quite a lot at Triage. So that was one of the things that kind of drew me to some of Lyndon's work. So hopefully it'll be a good conversation. But yeah, Lyndon, I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, your background. Oh yeah, you're also in Australia. I never mentioned that. But yeah, introduce yourself as you wish.
Yeah, so I'm located in Melbourne, Australia. I work for a company called JPS Health and Fitness. We are doing our best to, as our hashtag is, raise the standard of the fitness industry. My role or my background, I guess, I got into lifting weights at sort of 16, got very interested in it. Went and studied exercise and sports science through uni, and I was initially looking to go into strength and conditioning because I was really drawn to the more scientific method of doing things. But now my real passion is general population. I think it's very cool to take what we know about human metabolism, sports nutrition, sports science, all that extremely high value information that is accessible by athletes and coaches and people in that realm, and really start getting it out there to the general public. So that's, I guess, one part of my role is just coaching and helping spread good practices, and then helping to spread good information also through the more educational component of my work. That's me basically.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think you guys are doing a great job like that. I like that hashtag as well, like raise the standard. Like that's essentially probably one of our main goals at Triage as well. So it's nice to have like a lot of different people working towards that goal, because I always say that personal trainers are probably like a forgotten but key part of the puzzle in this kind of the problems that we have in modern healthcare, chronic lifestyle primarily related diseases. And I think having a stronger front line is a really good goal to have. So yeah, it's great to see many people working towards that now. So as you've mentioned, you're interested in science. You have some background in formal education in the science or sciences, and from what I gather, you're quite interested in the actual kind of philosophy of science and thinking and logic and reasoning, etc. as well. And one of the things that we actually spoke about with our last guest as well, and that has really proliferated within the industry in the last probably 5 to 10 years, is the idea of being evidence-based. And my observation on that kind of being evidence-based, and that kind of hashtag team science, as you said in one of your articles, my observation on that often is that we almost end up just building a camp mentality that is no different to any other camp mentality. As in, we shouldn't necessarily think that we're better than the low carb crowd or the keto crowd if our reasoning is on the same level as theirs, in that we just trust a handful of gurus. So what is your perspective on being evidence or science based, in terms of do you feel there's a cult there? Do you feel that people have the reasoning abilities that they should to really consider themselves science based? And yeah, just give me your thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I do completely agree, or whether you actually made an argument there rather than just a question. I do believe there is a very large camp mentality in the evidence-based community. We prize the product of our beliefs rather than the process of how we acquire them. More so like that. We value knowing that it's a calorie deficit that causes fat loss, or it's volume between 10 and 20 sets. And, I listen to Mike Israetel and Eric Helms, and therefore I'm evidence-based. Like, I think this is a very, there's obviously trade-offs to everything. So while it probably is still net positive overall that people are identifying as evidence-based, that they're listening to these people, there does just need to be the people that are, listening for the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, and then just being like, look, like, this is great, but let's not take it too far. Let's remember why these people that we listen to are revered, not just make them become the authority, because then, then they become the Charles Poliquin of 2019, and then shit hits the fan. I am I am, I think, continually confronting evidence that this is a problem when we will hold workshops and things like that. And I might present a case during, like, I might do a lecture on hypertrophy nutrition, muscle growth nutrition, and I'll make a strong case for like 15 minutes why micronutrients are actually important. And people who are already listening to JPS and listening to people that I would think these should be educated people, I go, wow, I just thought it was protein and calories. I was like, it's not though. Like, those are just a higher level thing. And understanding that something has a larger influence than something else doesn't mean that something else isn't important. And one of the major issues that I find with this is you tend to get people who dismiss things as unimportant simply because they don't understand them. And, well, I shouldn't be presumptuous on my behalf. Maybe they do understand them. But I think it is very common to see people hide behind just these platitudes, these very off the cuff, easy to dismiss things with sayings like it's just calories in, calories out. It's just progression over time. Take care of this and that'll take care of that. And it's like, well, we are the most complex biological system on the face of the earth. Like, we have a rudimentary understanding of the human body, let alone the human brain. Yet you get these people that just sort of think they can summarize, health, muscle growth, training, progression, behavior in 2 sentences because that's what their guru said.
And that's kind of the demands of the context as well, in that if you are forced within a social media world to have to summarize your thoughts in a couple of sentences or an infographic, then they are necessarily going to become sound bites, because you're not forced to elaborate. There's no platform on which you have to elaborate. And one of the things that might come up is like, I've seen so many like really intelligent like people that would be respectable put out things just about how food quality just doesn't matter. And it's like that's okay if you really elaborate and make sure that your listener understands. Food quality probably doesn't matter for changes on the scale within the context of a protein and calorie and exercise controlled diet, which doesn't happen in the real world. It's like you can't separate the upstream and downstream factors or any secondary factors from any intervention, because we're left solely with those sound bites. And again, it kind of factors in then to the cult mentality. And like you, I've seen that happen where someone will put up a very considerate post about, like they might put up a recipe or something and they'll be like, this meal is great because, it's got a decent amount of fiber and you're getting, a decent amount of micronutrition and stuff like that. And then someone will come into the comments and they'll be like, bro, this is so stupid. It's just macros. It's like, well, you're not necessarily wrong, but you're not really thinking things through. And that's the depth that's often lost, I think. And what leaves maybe people like yourself and others not with tens or hundreds of thousands of followers, because you don't have those quick sound bites of information to deliver. So it's a challenging problem, but at the same time, I kind of understand why it exists, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, no, I completely, again, agree. And I fear that we're going to run into a lot of agreement throughout this conversation. So
We'll have to just bring up something that we totally disagree on.
some beef. Yes, again, like if we're going to put ourselves in the camp of nuanced thinkers, like we came to this point in time by the process of evolution, and it does appear, I guess, depending on who you read, evolution doesn't necessarily favor organisms that seek the ultimate truth. Like there are just, obviously we have cognitive biases and heuristics and things like that our mind, that if we're going to take an extremely rationalistic approach to thinking, we go, oh, these are errors in thinking. But an error in thinking has evolved for a particular reason, because, and that's why heuristics evolve, because it's like they allow us to make based on quite limited evidence. So you know, we obviously can't sit here and be like, oh, these people are idiots because they're not thinking about, you know, the nuanced details. I just think it's important we all understand our place in the industry. And I have absolutely, I'd like to think absolutely, I've certainly haven't reached, you know, self-enlightenment or anything like that, but I've come to terms with, if this is how I'm going to convey information, and it's going to be long form, nuanced, I can be a slow talker because I'm trying to think while I talk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get the views, the followers, the likes that others are going to get. But that's, yeah, that is okay with me. And if I wish to acquire more popularity, then I have a job ahead of me explaining why my take on things is better than the alternative. And I like that challenge. Like, I guess that's why I would probably like to be thought of as just more of like a science advocate than just even someone in the fitness industry, like, and someone behind the scenes in the fitness industry. Like I guess that's something I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah. And I think another thing is that, like, you often have to think of it as a trainer of like what's your actual goal with science? Because sometimes I think it's almost just trying to fit into the current, you know, fitness culture, as in I have to put out the hashtag team science or science-based perspective if I want to be like part of the club, and if I want clients to think that I'm relevant. It's all because that's what generates that sort of traction online a lot of the time. You know, if you can be, especially if you can be controversial or you can be a myth buster. But we're kind of at that point now, I think, where like the myth busting is almost boring. You know, it's kind of at the point where, like, you know, everyone's sick of hearing like it's just a calorie deficit, bro, and all those simple things anytime anyone makes a point. Like I get that impression anyway from people. You know, a lot of the conversations in our Facebook group would be about those kind of more nuanced points that people bring up, and they'll be like, look, I know people always say this, but what about this? And then if you didn't actually have if you weren't actually thinking, you'd be like, oh, actually no one talks about that. And that's a relevant question to a lot of clients. And I see that all the time with our clients as well, where a lot of the questions that they ask on an individual level are just not covered in the online fitness, you know, conversation. So I guess my question then would be, you know, to be a good trainer, do you really need to engross yourself, or not necessarily engross yourself, but do you even need to identify as being this evidence or science-based person and focus solely on learning all those doctrines? Or are there a lot of other soft skills that are potentially just not celebrated as a result? Communication, you know, respecting the individual, considering their context, etc. Because I think those things are important.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those things are without a doubt important for the predominant amount of personal training clients. What most personal trainers fail to understand is that people are coming to them to feel better. Now you can achieve that via stress reduction, helping them feel more in control of their diet, helping them look better. But fundamentally, you have some kind of problem to solve. And once you do that, they'll feel better and they'll be thankful for that. How much science and reading PubMed actually helps with that, I would say falls in probably the minuscule amounts. It just, unless it is part of your marketing strategy to be up to date with the latest science, then I really don't think it's going to help you as a personal trainer to any large extent. And again, people need to be, I guess, wary of my background when I say that. I'm not just dismissing science. Like, I am pro science more than anything. I shouldn't say that. I am pro the process of science more than anything, probably than the product. It's not the PubMed studies. It's not, and I even hate how PubMed has now become the meme. Like,
it's like
you
a
could
meme,
ask, yeah, like you could ask multiple evidence-based coaches, what's another, research engine to find studies on? They could probably give you PubMed and that's it. Anyway, before I get too far off topic, you need to be able to, if you're going to be a personal trainer, you need to be able to solve the problems that people are going to come to a personal trainer with and look what they want. What do they want? If they want more muscle growth, do you have a method of helping someone achieve more muscle growth? That doesn't mean you need to have read the latest Brad Schoenfeld paper. If you have some kind of system for achieving that, you're pretty much gold. If you want to improve that method, sure, some science might help. But you certainly don't need to read science and be up to date, if that's even possible, to be a good coach or trainer.
Yeah, and I think this is a good conversation to have because, like, it's you and I who are people who are very much interested in reading the science, in trying to stay on the edge as much as possible, are essentially filtering down that message and saying, you actually don't need to be this person that's constantly on the edge. Because generally, that sort of like scholarly dialogue that's in all the 2019 papers, for example, there was a crosstalk series of papers recently about, is it purely exercise intensity or exercise volume that leads to mitochondrial adaptations for endurance? There was a really interesting series there. But is that really relevant to the personal trainer? Like, sort of, not really, like very, very rarely. It's probably not important at all. Like that personal trainer would be far better off going back to a basic like physiology 101 textbook and learning the basics of how the cardiovascular system works, how we're actually producing energy in exercise and trying to at least develop some reasoning as to why you're making your nutrition or your training recommendations. And like, I don't want to repeat everything that we talked about with our last guest because a lot of these topics actually came up, but yeah, I just think it's hard because it's a long-term process to develop that foundation of knowledge where, you've learned your basic muscle physiology, you've learned your basic cardiovascular physiology, that sort of quote unquote basic stuff. Like it takes a long time to learn that. And in the interim, you're not going to be, on the edge reading as you said, like the latest Brad Schoenfeld paper or anything like that. Even though like, if you are on the edge, read those papers, like do it. But they're very rarely changing the day-to-day recommendations that I make to my clients anyway. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like developing that foundation? Do you feel from your experience educating trainers that foundation of understanding that you probably got through your exercise science studies, do you feel that's a hole sometimes, or what do you think?
Yeah, I do think that is a major limitation. And it is the somewhat dysfunctional incentive structure that the industry has at the moment. It's just like, the goal is to get to studies. So I just need to find what I type in my search bar to pull up PubMed, then I can become one of those trainers. It's like, to say I definitely learned some of that foundational stuff through my undergraduate, but for the most part, it was just my desire to learn.
Yeah.
But an undergrad is beneficial because you're paying for it. You have deadlines. So it's like, I have had to spend months cramming it, so like if you can cram across months, like, I mean, collective, all of them added together months, you know, cramming, reading textbooks on Khan Academy, things like this. Like, you know, if you're trying to find the latest paper to be one of those, you know, up-to-date coaches, but you haven't actually gone through like Khan Academy or what's the other one on YouTube? It's eluding me. I'll come back to it. I'll remember it at some stage. They do fantastic, just like series on biology, anatomy and physiology, chemistry, that kind of stuff. Like, I would be going to that probably first before anything, then try your luck at a textbook, then potentially try a paper. That foundational stuff is key, because one of the interesting things about knowledge is, or any unit of knowledge, is that it can almost mean the opposite, or not just have an inefficient effect if you don't place in the correct context. It has the opposing effect. So an example that jumps to mind is, you've got to spend money to make money. And people are like, oh yeah, like they'll okay behavior of like spending money within a business because that's how you make money. It's like, well, no, it's all in the context of spending some money now can help generate a larger total net income in the future. Like, it's an investment, those kind of things. But like, taking that statement as it is, you've got to spend money to make money. You've also got to spend money to run your business at a loss. Like, and this is the dichotomous nature of knowledge to a degree, if I haven't completely lost you on that tangent. Do you understand what I mean? Like, without these foundational understanding of things, you can find some isolated piece of information and knowledge and completely misapply it.
Yes.
That's a risk when what you work with is human beings.
Yeah, and you do, this is probably going to segue into our next topic in general, but like a good example of where this becomes relevant is discussions around, for example, mechanical tension. You know, if you were to go back to, say, like Schoenfeld's series of papers, but mainly like the 2010 paper, probably initially, for like proposing the mechanisms of hypertrophy, and you see that, mechanical tension is one of these, drivers of hypertrophy. If you don't actually have like the basic understanding of like sliding filament theory, something that's like 70 or 80 years old, or winding filament theory, the more updated version, if you don't understand what's going on at the level of the actual muscle fiber, the myocyte, the sarcomere, if you don't understand like what those things are, what's going on there, what's in your muscle, then it's going to be difficult to actually like put that lesson into context. And this, I think, is a good example of where things do get taken out of context, because the person like you or I, who's gone and learned their muscle physiology or whatever, when they hear mechanical tension, they're thinking, okay, some sort of tension within the sarcomere or the muscle fiber or the muscle cell, and that's probably being transduced into some sort of chemical signal and leading to the hypertrophy process. And you can kind of put that into context, and then and only then you think about, all right, so what does that mean for training? How does that really come out into the real world? Whereas what often happens in the real world is we hear mechanical tension and you're like, what does that mean? More weight in the bar. Yeah, more weight in the bar, but it's not always so simple. So there are nuances there. So to transition into that part of the conversation, what do you think are the, I guess, misconceptions or misunderstandings, if there are any, about mechanical tension or other drivers of hypertrophy, the disconnect between that and the training process? Speak as much as you want.
That's an interesting question.
It's a bit of a loaded question, so apologies.
No, don't. I feel like I should apologize, because I won't have an adequate answer in this regard. I don't think. I am very much out of touch with the myth side of thinking, or like the idea that the current methodologies of the time, just because it's never been something I've ever really paid attention to. Like I've never had my finger on the pulse of, oh, this is the latest thing. Like people will literally come into the gym and be like, what do you think of XYZ? And I'm like, I have no idea who that is. I have no idea what it is. Like, yeah. So as I said, I'm vastly unaware of that because there's only so much information. There's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much information that I can come across and process on a daily basis. I, for the most part, am not going to waste an Instagram follow on someone who I don't see a large amount of value in. And I don't mean that in regards to only follow people that, you know, you agree with what they say. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, unless someone is operating on a similar level to me, then I'm not really going to pay attention to them. Mm-hmm. So, and not trying to be elitist in that regard either.
Yeah.
Like there are people operating on levels way above me who there's no point me following. And this actually brings me to circle back into, the previous conversation is, yes, you need to have a context of understanding things to use it appropriately, but you also need to have a context of things so it can stick, basically. Like I think there's the theory of like semantic network. Like that's kind of how our brains somewhat work and think about things. Or like the way I guess I describe it to the coaches that we work with is it's kind of like a spider web, like, and everything, like you need things in a certain area so that you can stick something else in there. Like if you've never ever heard of, like, never studied anatomy at all, and then you start reading like Boyle's joint by joint theory or something like that, that's going to be a wasted like hour for you. Like, yeah, that might be the goal or something. Like that's no one put that on the pedestal as the goal to get to in regards to anatomy. I'm just, for the sake of, you've got to do all this foundational stuff so that that final block you stack on top actually sticks. So it's not even just the contextual needs of that very high level piece of information. It's just like for pure like economical use of a personal trainer's time. For the most part, you could spend 2 hours reading a bunch of papers and then forget it all because there's nothing in your knowledge bank that you can connect that to. Like, I think you actually said in one of your Instagram posts that I really liked is like, knowledge is extremely incremental in nature. And that's why I really disagree with the whole like myth busting approach to things. It's just like, oh, bam, here's the evidence. Calories in, calories out. Anyone else is a clown for believing something else. It's like that person then is presented with one option. Am I going to entirely shift the way I think about this thing or stick with what I know? And for, the predominance of experiences that they have like that, people stick with what they know. They can just dismiss it. Unless you teach or like try and layer in context and teach people things, the hows, the whys, the whats, you won't be able to make that incremental change. And that is how I think you get people to think better thoughts, have more well-founded beliefs. And I really steered that away from the latest, muscle building fads. But
I think a good. My question was a pretty loaded question, to be fair. But essentially, I guess one of the points I was getting at, or one of the places we wanted to take the conversation, was potentially, right, when people understand that mechanical tension is a driver of hypertrophy, and then they link that then to one of the principles that's often presented of you got to progressively overload. And one of the things that I see often is people take that to mean, all right, I'm going to train like a powerlifter, or I'm just going to do 5x5, or I'm even just going to focus only on increasing my 1 rep max on these few lifts, and it's all layered on top of like essentially the context of powerlifting, because they're always the lifts that people try to get strong at. So yeah, they're some of the real world things. So do you feel that sometimes people maybe misunderstand the application of progressive overload within that context?
Yeah, without a doubt, I do. Just even in the isolated instance that people tend to just think of progressive overload as weight related,
Yeah.
like that may have been what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like that's such an intricate thing. Like the question, I guess, tends to come up of like, when we start talking about overloading, what's like, okay, what is the better method of overloading? Like, is it adding weight to the bar? Is it adding sets? Is it adding reps? And it's like, well, let's go a step back. Like, what are we trying to achieve with any of those things? Like, fundamentally, we are trying to activate high threshold motor units and take them to somewhere near failure, because then the movement velocity will slow, and then they'll experience high degrees of tension.
Mm-hmm.
And as you perfectly alluded to, high degrees of tension on the microstructure scale of a sarcomere can be completely misapplied, in the sense of, I'm going to add 5 kilos to my bicep curl this week. I did X amount last week and I've got a progressive overload. Like, you can actually trend in the wrong direction. So yeah, what am I trying to say here? I'm not surprised that these thought patterns or these thought processes and behavior patterns exist when people are exposed to the type of information they're exposed to. So I guess a more interesting question to me is, rather than like, what's some of the problems out there, is how do we deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yeah, and
What
I
do you
think
think on that?
yeah, I think part of it does almost come back to like understanding your basics, because if you do actually understand, like if you can look with that sort of almost microscopic lens and understand that, right, when they say mechanical tension, the goal is to apply that, at this level of the sarcomere, so that's within my muscle. And then you're thinking, all right, how do I scale that out? What does that actually mean? It's like, all right, that there's these anatomical attachment points, say between my bicep, so it's running from my forearm up towards my shoulder. So what might that mean if I then apply a load, and then you start to bring physics into it? It's like, all right, there's this load that's applied here, that's a force, there's a moment arm, there's a moment arm between the bicipital insertion and then the elbow joint, and it's like, all right, boom boom boom, we're connecting dots. And then, all right, what might that mean then for how I lift? It's like, all right, I probably don't want to move the other joints as much. I probably want to just move the joints across which that muscle is working. And maybe I don't want to use other joints in the body to jerk that weight up, because wouldn't that lead to like some slacking on the muscle during the rep? And you can actually just start to connect these dots. And then it goes even further, because you end up at the level of like rep ranges and stuff, because you understand, like, for example, like, you understand Henneman's size principle, or you understand how motor units function and how they fatigue, and the accumulation of metabolites, and all this stuff doesn't come from a particular paper. Like, well, it does, like decades back, but it comes from like your basics, where you're starting to reason things out, and you're looking at the right level, as opposed to looking solely at the gym floor level. Because what you see often is the sound bites from science being taken onto the gym floor. Okay, and when that begins to happen, you end up with someone hearing that you need more mechanical tension, you need progressive overload. So that all we can track in the practical, on the ground level, like objectively, because people love numbers, is the logbook. Like, that's one of the most common things people talk about. And it's almost assumed that if I've added 10 kilos on the logbook, that equals progressive overload, and that equals more mechanical tension. However, if there has been a change in, I don't know, the pace at which you lifted that weight, because if you're slamming down into the bottom of the rep, that's changing all of the forces that you're dealing with, or if there was a change in how your knees and hips tracked together. Like, if on week 1 they both raised at the same level, whereas on week 2 your hips shot back and then you came up. That's the different level of mechanical tension at the level of the quads. So I guess my personal bias would always be trying to come back to the basics and really just understanding that stuff and thinking about it. But the problem is that that's not infographic stuff.
Mm.
It's not as attractive. But that would be my thought process. But would you say that you think about things in a similar level, or like what's your thought process when it comes to programming? Do you run from like macro to micro or micro to macro, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess to answer more so like just the thought process question,
Yes.
what I'm trying to be more aware of is my thought process should be dependent on who I'm talking to, who I'm thinking
Yes,
for,
of course.
what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I guess I can leave that as it is. The programming question is again something I've been grappling with a lot lately. I was speaking to you with Luke Tulloch.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
yeah,
From
I think
Instagram.
he's a fantastic guy. Just a very nice guy in general, and that actually is important, I believe. But he's a fantastic thinker as well. And I was discussing with him the other day that I guess I'm coming to this stage in my hypertrophy programming, or just programming in general, level of understanding is what I'll basically do is I'll take a client and go, okay, cool. You currently you dumbbell press the 18s for 3x8 or something like that to almost failure. Like, let's forget about the technicalities of whether it's a 7.5 and 8,
Yeah.
8.5, whatever your RPE was. At near maximal effort, you're doing 3x8 at the 18s. To have a big chest, shoulders, triceps, pushing complex, I want you pressing the 26s for 4x12. Okay. Pretty simple. Like, we've got to get there. Once you can do that, you're pretty much going to have a big, pushing complex musculature. And then from there, it's almost a more, I don't want to say subjective or intuitive process, because I would like to think it is all founded on some very stringent thinking and researching and learning over the time. But I will basically go, you're pretty strong, but I guess your rep strength drops off pretty quickly. Like, you got up to say the 22s, able to press the 22s pretty quickly. You can only press them for 2 sets of 5 or something like that. So I'm going to put more volume work into this person. And that's going to mean we're looking to overload reps, we're looking to overload sets, these kinds of things. They need to build up more of the endurance component of hypertrophy, because I do think in hypertrophy is kind of the manifestation of like strength endurance, to put it quite simply. Again, it's a lot more nuanced than this, but I'll get tangled on my words if I try and get too complex. Whereas other people have, I guess, more of the endurance side covered. Like, they can pump out, they might get up to the 20s for 4x12 pretty quickly, but as soon as I put the 22s in their hand, their performance plummets. And it's like, okay, we need to spend a bit more time doing your more traditional strength work. And that's sort of the limiting factor in their hypertrophy. I guess that's just something I've observed, sort of factored into what I think about how you achieve hypertrophy from more of a practical perspective. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I quite like that idea of kind of trying to give the person an idea of where they should be trying to get to be close to the outcomes that they actually desire. As in, that person doesn't really care, like, if they lift the 4x12s for 26 or 30, it's like they want a bigger chest, bigger pushing muscles or whatever. And I quite like that idea, because it almost builds on an idea that one of my friends has written about essentially top down versus bottom up programming, where the top-down programming is essentially a sort of a Marxist approach to training planning, whereby you're essentially telling the part, you're trying to assume that you know all of the knowable variables, and you're saying this is exactly how you get to this endpoint. And that's what a lot of programming ends up like. It's like, if you do your 5x5 for the first 6 months of training, and then you switch to this program for the next 18 months of training, and then you'll be out of the intermediate phase and you move on to this stage of training. And it's almost like you're predicting exactly what that person needs. Whereas the other side of it would be the person who's far more challenging, far more complex, but the more kind of quote unquote capitalist sort of top or bottom up rather approach to training, whereby you're thinking about, like, you're starting from that place of epistemic arrogance. Okay, you're starting from that position, and you're saying, right, we can only know so many things here. Okay, we know the things that we don't know are far greater than the things that we do know. So you start by saying, right, so we know what you can currently do. We have some idea of the adaptations that take place, but we've got all of this research on quote unquote non-responders. So I have no idea where you're going to be on that spectrum. I don't know if you're going to be the guy that gained 59% over 12 weeks on his biceps, or the guy that lost -8%. It's like, I don't know where you are. So I think that's a really, really nice way of conceptualizing hypertrophy training, which is basically what you've just said in practice, and I've just said in a really complicated way. But what you're saying is that you're taking an outcome that's likely to be related to the person's goal. So bigger chest, probably related to having more strength across multiple sets in moderate repetition ranges. And then you're navigating that path thereafter. You don't know if you're going to go left or right in 2 months' time, because you're not at 2 months' time just yet. And then you make those decisions as you go. So yeah, I really, really like that sort of perspective.
I'm glad you think that, and I'm also super glad that you referenced Karl Marx and capitalism in a conversation around hypertrophy. That's awesome.
That's cool.
I'll have to read that. Did you say it was one of your...
Yeah, I'll send that on to you. Yeah,
that would be awesome. You made a very good point there at the end, that something people fail to understand is I think they conflate the proxy with the goal. Like, it's, the goal is hypertrophy. The goal isn't doing more volume. Okay. It's what we've come to understand is doing more volume probably helps with hypertrophy in given context. And people just go, yeah, they just reduce it to, I've just got to eat calories and do more volume. It's like, no, what you need to do is produce more, myofibrillar proteins than what you're breaking down in the tissue that you actually want to build. Like, they get this misconstrued idea of what will be a guiding light or a signpost in the process. They just start aiming for that. So yeah, I think that it is important that sort of I guess I would like to think people like you and I to exist in this industry is, for every 5 people there are that are saying, it's just this or just that, you've got to have somewhere that's like, hey, but don't forget about this, or don't forget what you're actually aiming for is that.
And the interesting thing about it is that I actually feel like we've actually gone through a lot of these stages already with nutrition, but we're making a lot of the same mistakes already, or like now, with training, because you see this all the time. Like, for example, if someone said to you that, like, eating more meals is far better for gaining weight, you'd kind of be like, well, not really, because you could make, some of your other meals smaller, or you could make your other meals larger and potentially eat less meals. Or it could be the case that, like, we don't actually know what's even in your meals. So, how am I supposed to know, and you said that you're eating a sandwich, but what's in the sandwich? Like, does it have loads of cheese and mayonnaise, or is it just like a lettuce sandwich? And now we're running into the same problems with training, where it's like, just do more volume. And it's like, okay, but volume is only a potentiating factor insofar as eating more meals is a potentiating factor. And, like, obviously it's not a perfect analogy, but you can see how it's relevant, where like you can keep doing more and more volume, and eventually there's going to come a point where you're doing very low quality work, you're accumulating more muscle damage, and potentially just like not getting any progress, and potentially even getting worse progress. Because one of the bottlenecks for people often is that they push themselves too hard in a training program. They get a bit of a niggly shoulder, they got some shoulder pain, and then they can't press properly for maybe another 2 months. So that's 2 months of progress that's no longer in the picture. So volume, from my perspective, should only be viewed as something, as you said, that's trying to tip the scales in favor of positive protein balance. And how much that you actually require is, again, one of those like things that we can't exactly know, but that we can try to reason out through that bottom up training process. Because again, we're making that top down mistake when we're reading research and we're saying, all right, on average, this was the number of sets that led to the most hypertrophy, but my client is not the mean of that group, or at least I cannot assume that they're the mean of that group, and also short-term training studies mightn't necessarily tell you about what that meant for the long term for those individuals. Because again, you have someone come into you in the gym first day, like what's your actual goal? Your goal is not to get them to a particular level of volume. It's to like sort out their exercise execution, make sure they're doing, all their exercises well. You've got exercises that are suitable for the person. You're taking care of all the things that you can control. And then you start to play with the variables that you have less control over time. So yeah, I think like, I know that's not as sexy because there's no like definitive recipe as such, but yeah, I think it's a more useful way of thinking about some of the nuances, at least, of the training process.
No, I completely agree. And I think like you mentioned the word bottlenecks, and that made me think immediately of another like hot topic of kind of like, periodization and like, I guess the extension of programming. And people go, oh, is it important? Is it not important? Blah, blah, blah. Like, to me, my conceptualization of periodization is addressing the limiting factors. Like, and there's just always going to be some limiting factor. Yeah, maybe it's just a shoulder niggle. Maybe it's you need more volume. Maybe it's you need to select exercises that have a more favorable stimulus to fatigue ratio. Like, there is innumerable issues that you're going to run into. Like, no one is walking around, well, I'm sure some people are. There is a very small percentage of people walking around with the level of muscle mass that they want. There is something that is limiting everyone. To me, periodization and programming is just addressing what's going to be the weak link or the limiting factor in that context, which is, yeah, why? Like, you can't just say it's volume or it's intensity or it's whatever. It's there was something else you said that I wanted to touch on, but I've forgotten what it was. That is okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, I've forgotten.
That's
Sorry.
okay. I speak too much. You didn't recall. But yeah, and
No.
the difficult thing as well is that, we like with periodization, especially for general population people, like the bottlenecks often are not even, they're not sets and reps. It's not sets and reps that you're dealing with as the bottleneck a lot of the time. Like, for example, to give one example of a check-in I had with a client yesterday, he's just after moving to Vietnam 3 weeks ago. So that might be fine for you. You're used to the warm weather, but if you're going from Ireland and you're pale and you're moving to Vietnam, massive change, massive change in your lifestyle. Like, one of the things he was reporting to me is that, like, he's been drinking loads and loads of water, more than he would drink at home, but his pee is just like radioactive yellow. Like, and I'm just like, right, man, we have to take care of that, because like that again is one potential bottleneck that could potentially be limiting his training performance right now. And he said his strength is just crap since he arrived. Like, other things, it's like it might be a difference in his sleep quality because of maybe the air quality, or it could be the heat, the humidity. Again, more variables, more things that are difficult to control for. He's working as a PE teacher in a school, and like doing like 20,000 steps a day, dancing around, like running games, super active, more than he would be at home. Again, new variable added into the picture. He's also trying to make friends over there. And as a result, he's kind of going out for a couple of drinks a few nights a week. And again, like not a massive problem, but again, these are all those like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% things that add up as potentially being a bottleneck. And I think your perspective on, you said, you're trying to essentially accumulate more muscle proteins. Like if we have that muscle protein balance perspective on hypertrophy, then you can sort of ask yourself, right, what's raising the bar and what's potentially, lowering the bar again. And, he can do the training, he can try and overfeed, and that'll sure push things up. But as those steps begin to increase and his activity goes up, and he's dehydrated and he's not sleeping as well, and he's having a few extra beers, all of those things begin to work against you. And there's just not a specific periodization strategy that's going to overcome that. And as I'm sure you're very aware, like that's the reality of working with general population clients, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And you reminded me of what I was thinking about, is like the idea that something doesn't matter, or the idea that there is no difference between two potential methodologies. Like, so an example might be, the idea that water doesn't matter for muscle growth. It's just this or that. It's just, proteins and calories. Or, 4x12 versus 4x8. There's no difference because it's 4 hard sets, to failure or something like that. And this is, again, just, these are symptoms of just this level of thinking that is going on in certain pockets of the industry. Like, one of the things that I'm constantly saying to the coaches and that we work with predominantly is that if there's a difference, there's a difference. Okay. Yep. If our level of understanding at this point in time is we can't find a difference between these two things that differ in some way, then it's a measurement or an analysis problem. It's not that they are the same. Okay. Sure, we might find out in time that the difference between a set of 8 and a set of 12 is minuscule. Like, it will never be practically important. But to say they're the same, it just on face value seems like, I don't know, just like dumbfounding to me. Like, a set of 8 is not the same as a set of 12. There are differences there that we're probably not aware of, and that's fine. And then coming back to the thing about like, water intake doesn't matter for muscle growth. It's like, but then once you factor in this person's also drinking alcohol, they're not sleeping enough, they've moved to a foreign country, it's like, you can't dismiss something as just saying it does not matter. Like, cool. On the template case study that you learnt about, in maybe your Cert 3-4, or just, you may not have even done that, because that's another one of the issues in, I think, this industry, is that now a lot of with the rise in social media, a lot of the thoughts and the thinking are generated by blogs, forums, things like this. And a lot of people are commenting, saying things and giving momentum to movements that obviously they haven't even worked with people. They haven't actually tried to put muscle on a 45-year-old female who has 3 kids. Like, cool, do more sets. Awesome. She's already coming in tired in between dropping the kids off at school and then going and taking the puppy to puppy training that's been biting the couch for the last week. Like, she doesn't have time to do 15 sets per body part. Like, and now at this point, I'm probably just ranting and being frustrated, which is something I don't want to do. But people, let me potentially summarize with this, and this is not a question that you asked, but let me push my ideology. People need to be aware that learning something and intellectual humility should go hand in hand. if you acquire more knowledge, or say you now learn that it's better to do more sets than less sets for the most part with hypertrophy. If you just close your mind off to everything else when you learn that, you're going to be more destructive than helpful to just the state of the industry and people around you, I think. If you learn something, you need to accompany it with, okay, I now need to be on the lookout for the dangers of this position that I now hold. Like if I guess you envision your knowledge as like a state in space. Like you've moved to a new location, that location has different dangers and different things that you need to be on the lookout for. So
Yeah, and
sorry, that was
I do I
irrelevant.
do think no, it is. I do think that essentially, like, a lot of the points you're getting at is like just the importance of actually working with people, whether it be online or in the real world. That like real people, individuals, are humbling. You know, they humble you because you think you can know it all and know the perfect recipe until you work with someone in the real world, and then it's like, oh, this is actually quite different. You know, there's a lot of additional variables. And you actually also just reminded me when you said the word epistemic again, that I meant to say epistemic humility earlier in this episode, not epistemic arrogance. That is a different concept. So if you've read like Nassim Taleb, like you kind of understand what I'm talking about. But yeah, I shouldn't have said that phrase. But anyway, irrelevant for now. Yeah, one of the things I wanted to touch on was, oh, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, like, and another thing, you know, you touched on a few of the variables that people might say just don't matter. But again, I had another client who, when they had a certain meal, a certain number of hours before their workout, they couldn't get their belt on properly because they felt bloated, and it totally compromised their squat performance. So for me to turn around and say, well, actually, did you know that like meal timing and the foods you eat actually just don't matter, you know? And the fact that you're bloating, like, it just doesn't matter, you know? But so these things do end up mattering, but it's not necessarily something that you can then put out as a broad message on social media. So I guess that is the crux of the challenge here, is like what you advise at an individual level and what you advise at the population level. Because by definition, our population generalizations need to be really simple. They need to be broad. They shouldn't be overly prescriptive, which is why you can't just say a number of sets. Whereas that's often what we're almost looking for when it comes to science. It's like people go to science because they think there's that science. They don't understand that science is a process. They think that it's almost like a list of facts that's just there that you can then go and learn, and then you'll have, you know, the secret knowledge. And like I put up a series of stories sometime last year about how I just think I don't think physiotherapy information can be delivered effectively online. I just don't think it's something that's working or that can be put out well, at least not on the individual level. Because what you see in the physiotherapy field a lot of the time is most of the physio and rehab pages that have over 100,000 followers, like, they're just spouting mostly bullshit, first of all. But after that, it's just these individual hacks and tricks that get swept up by a broad range of people, and it just doesn't end up working. Because what you end up seeing is that not only is someone telling you, giving you a specific tool without the context, they're giving you the context and almost a diagnosis. You know, for example, it could be something like, have you ever had lower back pain? And it's like, well, yes, everyone is going to get low back pain at some time. Okay, that's the thing. So then they've just drawn in literally this massive audience, and they've said, here's one of the causes of low back pain. So that person's like, oh, that's my diagnosis. I've got a facet joint arthropathy or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, here's my solution. And then it just ends up being, you've just given this one solution, but not only a solution, you've given a person a diagnosis based on a vague symptom that everyone is going to experience. And I think that's almost how we end up funneling people online, is like the same with hypertrophy. You know, are you a skinny guy who struggles to gain muscle? It's like, well, like, yes, like a lot of us are skinny guys who struggle to gain muscle,
Yes.
and then it's like, oh yeah, this is what you have to do. So
Mm.
I think that's a hurdle that is difficult to get over. I don't think there's a perfect solution, because ultimately I think we're wrestling with a medium of distributing information that isn't necessarily all that great for giving people individualized information, you know?
Yep. No, I do completely understand. And yeah, like it's so hard, isn't it, to like, again, like we're here trying to sell science more than not, sort of thing. Like there's so many people that are just dismissing science as like, the fuck is that? I don't give a shit. Like I want, 22-inch guns, and Ronnie Coleman in Muscle Mag tells me how to get that, not some dweeb in a research lab.
Yeah.
So then we're kind of like, no, like science is great. It can do this for us. But then it's just like, you've got the people even on the other side of that being like, hang about, like science isn't just the best information. It's actually our best guess at the information given the way that we go about the process. And that's just like, oh man, no wonder that we can't drag a large amount of people with us that far. It's, I guess, like what I've really been thinking about lately is, what is the intervention or the whatever we can introduce into the system that will have the largest magnitude of positive effect. And I guess I started thinking about this because science doesn't quite seem to be the right answer. What I'm thinking is just generally like understanding critical thinking more so than not. It's like, there was a paper that I was looking at the other day where it was basically, with increasing level of scientific knowledge did not come an increased ability to defend against pseudo-scientific claims. So they basically studied business undergrads, and I think they were biology undergrads. The biology undergrads had a greater level of knowledge of scientific facts. That didn't translate into a greater understanding of scientific theories. So they failed to actually show a significant difference in conceptual understanding of science. And then again, there was a non-significant difference in belief in pseudoscientific phenomena, such as, ghosts or astrology or something like that. Astronomy, astrology.
Yeah, astrology.
So, sorry, like, again, I'm probably not quite fitting this correctly onto the conversation that we were having, but are you following me somewhat? Like, it's,
Yeah.
now we can't even just be like, science is the answer, because what we need to be aware of is that knowledge can be extremely isolated. So just because you get these people that know something about, they know a lot about a little, they then have this big sweeping claim. It's like, yeah, now I know a ton about everything, sort of thing. And just, that made me think of when you're mentioning the physiotherapy page. Like, there's just, people don't appreciate just, no, I've forgotten my train of thought. But like, getting up at 5 a.m. will do that to you.
It's all good, man. But no, like, essentially, like, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, sorry, you made an excellent point though about the physiotherapy thing, and that it can't probably be executed effectively online. Like, there is such a human interaction component to making someone feel better, that, yeah, it's not just information at the end of the day. And to tie that back into the prior conversation, these are the facts of exercise science, these are the facts of diet, these are the facts of whatever, is not enough to convince someone, like, I'm sorry, but if you're going to be an arrogant asshole across social media and try and make people look like clowns for not understanding calorie balance, which is a component of physics, which is like one of the most complex topics known to humans, like it's as simple as energy balance. Oh, okay. The 55-year-old menopausal woman who's struggling to lose weight, it's just as simple as calorie balance. Yeah, she's going to appreciate hearing that, isn't she?
Yeah, and I think it is a difficult thing to just tease out those additional details, because when you say things like it's just calories in, calories out, people don't realize that is almost like it's a summary without discussing all of the inputs on either side, inputs and outputs,
Yep.
and that any output or input affects essentially the other side of that. And again, just really difficult to get those nuanced points out on social media. It's just not developed for that as such, I guess, and yeah, basically what we're getting at is that we're all just screwed. No, but yeah, no, you touched on the critical thinking aspect, and I think that's super important, because like being scientific should be more about like how you think rather than what you think. And ultimately, like what we're doing at the moment, I think a lot of the time online, in people who brand themselves as like, this is the science and everything else is bullshit. It's like, even things like intermittent fasting, I think is a good one, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of those ones that's on the edge, that like you can't be that explicit that it's bullshit. Like you just can't, like, but loads of people do. They're just like, oh, intermittent fasting, it's just a fad because it's just about calories. And it's like, hold on a minute. Do you not realize how this actually plays into the whole context of controlling your calories? And I think one of my favorite areas of research at the moment that is going to lead to hopefully a lot of humility among people who are just who are just kind of the myth busters. And like, we've all been there, I've been that person. I've been the guy who feels great busting myths and stuff, but there comes a point where you're like, all right, we have to think about it more. But one of the areas of research is, I think, time restricted feeding, particularly as it relates to chronobiology and chrononutrition. I think there's going to be a lot of humility in the nutrition sphere once that information is kind of disseminated a little bit more, because it's kind of like, well, like meal timing to some degree might matter. Periods of fasting probably beneficial to some degree. At least extending your fasting window, and that's just something then that has to be added on as an additional nuance, where you're like, oh, it's all about calorie balance, but also meal timing might matter because it affects this stuff, and protein also matters because that affects this stuff, and how active you are then changes the other side of the equation. And it's like, it's just, we don't have this meme of it's a calorie deficit full stop kind of a thing.
No, you raised again a fantastic point. And Danny Lennon gave one of the best talks I've ever seen, like regardless of discipline, at
He's fantastic.
UABC this year. Danny is without a doubt the man. It was such a well-constructed, well-delivered, nuanced talk on chrononutrition. Like eating in regards to like circadian rhythm and those kind of things. It was basically like, eating around our circadian rhythm. And he was totally right. Like and again, we're aware of these things, but people aren't. Is like, it's just calories. Well, it's like, well, no, that is just the environmental component of the environment organism interaction. It's like, if you can eat a certain amount of calories that allows the organism to function more optimally, that's going to lead to a better outcome. Like, we are organisms that have dualistic natures. Like, there should be periods of feeding and fasting, should be periods of light and dark, wake and sleep. To just be like, it doesn't matter if you just eat your calories whenever. It's like, okay, probably not the way the human body evolved, but that's fine. But then all of a sudden it's like, that, you're making a case for how the human body evolved. Go and hang with the paleo crowd.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then we're going to be back at the start of the conversation again. Like, it's just, we need to break down some of these ideological camps and barriers that exist within the industry. And what I am afraid of is the myth busting, fact dropping does not actually help, because what you need to recognize is no one believes their beliefs are stupid. I don't sit here and go, you know, as an atheist, I'm a fucking idiot for not believing in God. Like, that's just not, we go, I think I'm at the, I have the superior or more well-founded belief in this regard. So it's like, when someone believes that insulin is the reason that inhibits fat loss, don't go, you're a fucking idiot, and go, insulin fairy. Like, that's such a straw man argument. Like, this person doesn't actually think the insulin fairy is inhibiting their fat loss. They've just got an isolated piece of information that they're holding in a way that is obviously obstructing their view of what we deem to be the truth. Like, yeah, I'll round out on that. Let's all just be a little more understanding that if someone believes something different to you, they don't consider themselves an idiot. So you probably shouldn't treat them that way.
Yes. And religion, I think, is the perfect parallel here, because on both sides, you assume that the other side are totally dumb a lot of the time. And I was I was that person in my late teens, even early 20s, probably until I think 2 years ago, probably. I was the atheist who was just like, how could people possibly believe in religion? Are they dumb? This is totally stupid? And then I came across some of Jordan Peterson's stuff, and that was kind of like, okay, this is a different perspective on religion. Like, not that I necessarily agreed, but it was different. And then I read some of Nassim Taleb and heard some other people talking about, like, more so like the evolutionary role of religion and the community and the rituals and all of these different things, and kind of Peterson on, like, subjective versus objective truth, and all these different ideas that I had never been exposed to. And then I was like, wow, like, that's a different perspective. And I began to look around me thinking about, how is going to church every week, what purpose is that serving for, like, my grandfather or my grandmother or whatever. And it's like, this is actually really interesting. There's clearly so much more to this that I couldn't see, because I was blindsided by the fact that, like, my assumption of religion was like, people actually think there's a man in the sky. Like, are you serious? That was kind of it. Whereas when you start to look broader and you appreciate all of these different things, it's like, all right, now I get it. Now I get why that serves a function. Not that I'm like going in and reading my Bible after this or anything, but you can appreciate it. And I think that should always be the goal. Should be to, like, first seek to, someone said that to me before, I don't know who initially said it, but first seek to understand and then to be understood. Because if you do expose yourself to, like, the hypotheses around, like, the insulin hypothesis or something, like, you can see how that's, like, a very reasonable stance if you have not read the other research or you have not really delved into some of the details. And that's one of the things with a lot of people who, for example, in the low carb or the keto community, who are, like, real strongly held beliefs, like, often they're not idiots. They're people with degrees in biochemistry. Some of them have PhDs. Like, clearly they're thinking. So we should be trying to understand where that perspective is coming from first, and then make our arguments. Because if it's just like, that's just dumb, then there's going to be half of the general population that are going to be like, all right, I just happen to have fallen into the hands of the evidence-based guys. And then the other half are going to be, I just happen to have fallen into the hands of the low carb keto guys. But if you don't have the reasoning apparatus to be able to reason why you actually believe what those guys now believe, then you're essentially no different. You just got lucky, and your outcomes could be the same, in that you could go your whole life believing that it's all about insulin, and you end up eating a healthful diet and live a long, fruitful life. And that is essentially like, that belief system has some, like, evolutionary properties to it, to a degree, in that, like, it's a pretty fit belief system. Like, you could look at it almost like in a religious context. On the other side of the coin, it's like the person who had the quote unquote evidence-based beliefs, they think it's all just calories. And again, then they also have a great diet and they eat healthily, and they end up living the same life. So from the on the ground practical outcome, the outcome ends up being the same, despite the fact that the beliefs were different. So ultimately, the goal should be to try and develop your reasoning apparatus if you want to make good decisions, because otherwise it could just be luck, you know?
Yep. No, I completely agree. And that quote is, first seek to understand, before you seek to understood, is fantastic. And without knowing who said the quote, I would fathom and guess it would be Socrates or something like that. Those guys were onto it miles ago.
Boys.
But with just finally, have you listened to? Are you a Sam Harris fan?
Yeah, I haven't. I've listened to a good bit of his stuff, but not all of it. Not as much as some people.
Did you, by any chance, listen to his latest episode with Ricky Gervais? Or
No, I didn't. I actually listened to the two after that, but I didn't listen to that one yet. So if you recommend it, I will.
I do recommend it. He made a fantastic point that is relevant here. Like, credit to Ricky. I think he's a thinker and he's a very funny guy, but like touches on some deep issues. He was talking about how the liberals, and I'm speaking in regards to like the rest of the world liberals, in Australia, the liberals are actually the conservatives. The liberals treat the religious conservatives in America of being like these idiots, like, you know, they're opposing like abortion and things like that. And it's like, no, if you actually understand, or like if you are viewing the world from their point of view, they literally do think you are killing a baby. Like, you would have to be a horrible human being to have that worldview and not have that actual view on the matter. Like, it just needs to, like, people need to understand, it's like, okay, there is a reason this person believes what they believe. It might be a bad reason. And if it's a bad reason, then you can probably go in there, deconstruct it and help them. But don't treat them like an idiot. Like, the world is a harsh enough place at the best of times. Let's try to make it a little easier on each other.
Yeah, and I think if you're interested in that perspective, Jonathan Haidt also has another book. I can't remember what it's called at the moment.
Righteous Mind.
The Righteous Mind, that's the one.
It is a fantastic book.
And he essentially presents that case for like why someone who is, if you want to dichotomize into liberal and conservative, why they might view the world in different ways. It is almost like, however, when I was reading it, I was like, I thought he was writing it as if he almost felt sorry for conservatives, as if their beliefs were so ridiculous, which again is almost making the mistake. But maybe that was my own bias going through. But yeah, I think that's good, because like, again, like whether it's political, whether it's a social issue, whether it's nutrition, whether it's training, you can almost always get to the point where you really do understand why someone else has a certain belief. And unless you get to that point, there's never going to be productive dialogue or any sort of exchange. It just ends up polarizing. And you see that in politics all of the time, where you just create a straw man of the other person's side of the argument, and there's literally nothing in the center. There's no conversation because it's so spread apart, you know. And yeah, we do the same thing in training. You know, it's like you're either the super high volume evidence-based guy, or you're the low volume, high intensity training type of guy. And it's like, those guys don't go to failure, absolute losers. Those guys do go to failure, idiots. You know, and it's like, do you realize that you're polarizing something that is such a small nuance? It's like, you know, it's a change in repetition velocity that you guys are arguing about.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, I just think that dialogue, that seeking to be understood or to understand is step one of this.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I just wanted to thank you for having me on and for giving, I guess, someone who probably isn't as considered to be as attractive as sexy in the industry, and someone that is trying to say the things that don't sell as well. So thank you. I think you are doing a good job and a good thing for the industry. And I'm not saying that, sorry, in relation to having me on. I was doing that separately. Thanking you for having me on and saying you're doing a good thing for the industry. I wasn't wasn't conflating those two
Yeah,
things.
I am
But
such a
yeah,
good
thank
person
you
for
again.
having you on. This is the high point of my life, having Lyndon on the podcast.
Yes,
um,
you've just moved up some virtue points in God's eyes.
yes. But yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on. I hope people enjoyed the episode. And if people are looking to find out more about you or JPS, where would you direct them? Anything you've got coming up or anything like that?
Yeah, like the two places I would probably suggest you find me is uh, most of my work that I think is worth reading would just be on the JPS blog. Like as we said, like the long form, nuanced ideas are the ones that I have interest in. You won't find me on the JPS Instagram very often. So yeah, if you want to check out some of my work, you can go to the JPS blog, or if you want to just view my own personal Instagram, I don't take Instagram life too seriously. I try to have some fun with it, but I do share interesting or things that I find interesting on my story or on my page, whatever. That's just hot underscore and underscore dangerous on Instagram. So you can find me at those two places if you like, and just harass me about something. Let's talk about politics, religion, gender issues. We'll go wild.
Fantastic. All right. So thank you very much, Lyndon. And for the rest of the listeners, we'll be back with Mr. Paddy Farrell next week. So we will see you then.